Chaos. Woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning, chilling with coffee mugs, me and coffee chugs, talking education all across the nation, pushing boundaries, thinking innovation, living on that edge of chaos, going insane, listening to coffee chugs like caffeine for the brain. One of the top teachers in Iowa, word is born, here to show the world that there's more here than corn. Chaos.
Hello, everyone. How you doing? Welcome back to another episode on Living on the Edge of Chaos podcast. I am here with the awesome Scott. And Scott, I was going to dive into this. I was trying to figure out something really clever around the idea of prototyping and iterating to jump in here. And nothing just came to mind. I think it's because of it's my excitement and a twofold. And here I am already rambling on before you even get a chance to introduce yourself. But like I'm holding this book, which nobody can see, and we are in the middle of currently a pretty large project that I'm doing with 25 classrooms, and we are like trying to work through the murkiness of prototyping. And so the book has been perfect release time date-wise, and it's really caused me to rethink a lot about my own concepts around prototyping in all good ways. But let me hit pause here. Clearly, I've had a lot of coffee today. Scott, who are you? What do you do? And what in the world do you got going on?
Well, it's great to be here. My name is Scott Wiffhoft, and on any given day, I'm doing probably one of maybe three things or four things, but I often am teaching design and design concepts, from product design to design thinking. Lately, I've been teaching courses in prototyping and space or environments prototyping as well. I have taught at the University of Texas at Austin, Stanford University, as well as what's been a cool run of programs at various universities in and around Tokyo, which has been a really cool opportunity again for the past, I don't know, probably 10 years now.
Oh, wow.
So teaching design and then also doing design. So I am a product designer and a design strategist. Most of that work usually revolves around space design or aspects of environments design for a range of organizations, from schools, K through 12 up to higher ed kind of thing, to startups and well-established sort of large businesses that are trying to maybe introduce themes of collaboration or creativity or innovation in existing physical workspaces and then sort of cultural workspaces. So
Sure.
Sometimes it's about like culture shift or designing for culture shift, as well as like what kind of tables should we have? It's a range from sort of I guess people to products. Probably that sums it up a little bit, I guess.
Yeah. Just a little bit going on. Yeah. And for those that can't see the screen, the book that I was holding up it's his latest book called This Is a Prototype. And it's part of a series through the Stanford D School. It's a phenomenal set of books. And what I love about them is you can almost just kind of open up to any page and process and learn or read it through like I have. And it's just very practical stuff to get you going, not just like the theory behind all the things, but actually stuff to go forth and do. And I want to ask some specific questions about it. But before we do, my latest kick has been like coming to this understanding that in education, and really probably just in general, just in life in general, we use a lot of words. And I think like we have like a kind of a collective understanding of what the words mean. And then we assume that other people understand it as well. Mm-hmm. And so I thought it'd be interesting just to start at a base foundation to kind of paint a canvas for the listeners today is like when we say the word, or when you say the word or write the word or teach the word prototype, what is a prototype in that sense? Maybe we could start there and kind of build this conversation up that way, because it's, as I said, I feel it's a word, everybody uses it, but do we kind of all have the same understanding of what it is?
That's such a cool question. And a cool consideration too, that the same word, literally the same word, might mean something totally different to an individual, and even an individual in an organization. So, I might be working within a company or a school or even just a department or colleagues, peers. And we might be in a, as you pointed out, like a phase of prototyping. You got some prototyping, big prototyping projects going on. Like, okay, great, we're all in that. But actually, each of us individually might have like quite a different understanding of what that means, and even sort of how you show up on a daily basis. Like, oh, we're about to go do something. Cool. What are you ready to do? How are you preparing yourself? How are you showing up? So in one way, I know that's been a perennial interest in a observation of like, that does mean so. I've noticed it does mean something to different people at different times and different organizations. And I wonder if there's something to that. And then I was struck by how students, particularly design students, I'm speaking now mostly of undergraduate students, but students who are getting familiar with considering themselves designers and design doers and design thinkers, what they consider a prototype to be, or what they have heard about it, or what they know. And something that really commonly happens is there's a tension between like a prototype as a question and a prototype as a statement, or like a declaration. And I think there is, which is debatable, but I think there's an opportunity to consider a prototype or a phase of work called prototyping to be rooted in curiosity, and a phase that you can practice and develop and explore, where you are actively focusing on your curiosity or what you're learning in that stretch, as opposed to that stretch being like a proxy for being right. Like there's a I might make a prototype, right? So I pick something up, I've got it in my hand, and implicitly there is almost like a gamble or like a lottery. Like I'm holding in my hand right now the answer. I got it right. And when I prototype, meaning when I show this to someone else and say, hey, here's a prototype I made, and their reaction is, oh, that's amazing, that's fantastic, I love it, it works. Or maybe even, oh, it doesn't work. Okay, great. Change this, and then it'll be right. We've just sort of pole vaulted past like what do I need to learn? Let's say this is right, so to speak. What do I need to learn to understand why it was right? Or what made it right? How did someone interpret it? What did it mean to them? I think there's this isn't to say that people don't do that, but very often it gets compressed. And sometimes that phase of discovery, that phase of curiosity, that phase of understanding gets squished for lots of maybe external reasons, like professionally, you're hired to design something, being like, I don't know, you're a world famous box builder. You're on contract to like make boxes. So someone who's paying you, or someone who's saying like, good job, you're showing up to them with the best box, you can come up with. It's like, here, you see the final thing. You don't see the sort of in between noodling or the early version, so to speak. That might be for you to do by yourself. And as a result, people get accustomed to connecting correctness with the sort of praise phase, where you say like, I made that thing right. I'm getting celebrated because it's correct, and now I'm done. And I don't know, that payoff can like squelch or like let's say de-incentivize particularly students to get accustomed to getting curious and staying with the like, oh, what am I learning? That's really important. It might not, like, the objective here might not be the, I don't know, a thing or a widget or a particular answer. It's more about, whoa, I'm really awesome at asking questions. I am fantastic at making things and understanding from them, whether those things are intended to be, like products or outcomes or not. I'm amazing at creating experiences that I can learn through and from. That's something that doesn't often get acknowledged, I think, quite as much particularly when we think about products or physical answers and solutions. So,
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
that was a
no.
long meandering way of, I think there's this tension between sort of declaration and inquiry. And at least with this latest content, I was trying to focus on and at least spotlight a little bit. Oh, how can we focus more on the inquiry part? How can we focus more on celebrating and advancing your curiosity as a skill or as a credential?
Yeah, I love that. There's so many great things in there. You said that we could go on for hours with all the stuff that I'd like to just rack your brain with on. You were talking about that, and it makes me think about one of the things with some of the projects or experiences we're trying to create with some of the phenomenal educators in classrooms is trying to deliberately ensure that we're leaving space, and by space, not just physical space, but the mental emotional space in a school day for kids to have the opportunity to kind of sit, or I always like to say, to marinate in that, just like you said, that kind of inquiry, prototyping, making phase where, so often in a K-12 setting anyways, we would study and get all the facts, or we'd be told what to have, and we'd do all that first, and then we'd maybe make something kind of, I always call it like the brownie box effect, where everyone gets the same square slice of brownie, versus like that making that testing out the ideas along the way, which then reverts like the learning to a deeper level as a byproduct of the kids are passionate about seeing an idea come to life that they chose. Doesn't mean it doesn't have to be a free for all. There's always creative constraints. And so as you were talking about that, it makes me think a lot of one of the initial phases of prototyping. I don't know if it's an official phase or not, is I always see where kids really struggle. And I always call it the muckety muck, but it's like they're excited, they have their ideas, they've done some research, they think they got the answer, right? Like they're excited and they think it's the solution, it's perfect. We then have them go, and this is where at the time of this recording they're going to be moving into next week. They're going to sketch their ideas out so we can understand what's going on in their brain for their group and make sure. And then we give them some just basic material and say, now go make it. And by materials, it could be tangible, popsicle sticks and that. It could be also digital if it's an app or whatever. Like, let's go make. And it is so hard to take an idea that's 2D and make it 3D to bring it out to the world. And there's this piece here that if they can kind of hold on through that and still be excited, man, watch out, the world is going to be on fire. But man, they can also create a lot of tension too, especially if they're brand new to that. So I'm curious, as you're working through prototype or you're through your courses or working with people too, do you see that similar type of, it's not really a friction, it's just the part of the iteration of enhancing our prototyping or enhancing our ideas, or do you see it in other places as well? I mean, it's not the only place, but that just seems to be the first pit stop of the learning journey where we go. And I think that's where we, like you said earlier, where we start to figure out what are we good at? Am I the one that's good with my hands? Am I the one that's good at seeing the big picture? Am I the one that's kind of a little good in all the things? Or maybe I've got a really great skill here or speaking or whatever it might be. So I'm talking too much. I want to hear more from you, but I'm just curious where your head goes in this.
I'm loving the visual of the first pit stop on the process. That's great. Yeah, I'm also resonating deeply with the a phrase that you brought up earlier around creative constraints, or a concept of creative constraints, and seeing how that plays out in the phenomenon that you just described of, students got an idea, they're excited to make the idea, and it's a really hard thing, and it's an uncomfortable thing to sort of tell a student, no, don't get excited about something, don't make it like that. That's I don't know, I'm sure there are a bunch of educational theories about that phenomenon, but it's terrible. It's a bad thing. You're like, no, that's what you're always hoping for. Like, oh, you're excited. Oh, you want to do something in response to your excitement or I don't know, your curiosity, whatever. Great, go do it. So that concept of creative constraints, I think, can come back in a really useful way, particularly early on when we're thinking about ideas and students getting attached to ideas, or I would say getting past, getting past like a reasonable phase of acceptance. Like they're already playing out how well this works. It already turns into a business. I mean, even like, young students already have this entrepreneurial sort of route, and like, oh, this is going to make me famous. So any number of motivations, but the notion of creative constraints can be really helpful in as you were describing, of like, okay, we're going to work on this for a week and then you're going to tell me something, or we're going to work on this for 2 days and then you're going to show it to someone else in the room at whatever phase it's in. So you've got like we've got time as an external forcing function, super useful for little kids, for big kids, meaning like seasoned adults. Any time constraint, the introducing, like a low resolution materiality. So you mentioned potentially like maybe some students are working in digital concepts. They're coming up with apps, or they're coming up with sort of VR concepts that, I don't know, ultimately might take a technological and technology-based solution and build out. Great. For the moment, let's say, yes, we'll do that. What would we make right now to address an aspect or a notion? I think there's always this like a working backwards structure that can help identify and illuminate some constraints that can be helpful early on, and avoid potentially going too long sort of with too much intensity without getting outside of yourself when you're looking at your work, when you're deep in it. Like, oh gosh, I wish I would have paid attention to that a week ago before, I don't know, I painted everything. Or it's like woodworking, like, you've I don't know, gone to great length to build out all this cabinetry, and you're like, then you, I don't know, paint it black. And you're like, oh, I wish I would have asked a week ago what color this should have been, because now I got to sand everything.
Yeah.
So I think there's constraints that help you continue to be sort of additive, as opposed to having to like work subtractively. It's harder to let go of things than it is to sort of add on more. I think probably painting works out well there. It's easier to add paint than it is to subtract.
Yes.
Generally. But yeah, I think that the role of constraints and transitions show up, or can be, super strong. Classroom teachers, particularly elementary school, are so good at trying things out in really quick cycles, seeing what works. They have such accountability on a daily basis and proximity to their students. They're just, with the students as those students are experiencing things and experimenting with things. But the establishing some constraints seems like a good starting point for sure. And actually, there's something else that you brought up about the like letting it marinate. Wow, that as a facilitator, if a teacher or an educator thought of themselves as a facilitator, it is a really hard thing to sit with silence in a room and watch someone think.
Oh yeah.
It is like, it seems inefficient. It's uncomfortable because it's quiet, and you're like, well, if there's noise and action, that means something productive is happening. But if, students are sitting there kind of, just looking, or I don't know, seemingly mindlessly drawing something, it can feel weird. And as a result, you can squish that marinating phase, or like you can just like squelch any sort of like intellectual development or conceptual, I guess, curiosity that's happening, but isn't yet verbalized or isn't yet visualized, because people are still thinking. It's just a hard thing to do, to leave that silence there for a second.
Yeah, and I think it's also really hard. And I don't know if you feel this too when you're running your workshops or your courses, or maybe even as a designer. But I know as like working with being formerly in my own classroom, and now I support educators, and I have an awesome job where I get to like work with educators from time to time, like I'm doing with this current project we're doing with NASA. And it's really hard not to tell them what you're thinking. Like you want to so bad be like, have you thought about this, or you should do this, or and as opposed to, I know that's where I'm at with an educator that I just is phenomenal. We've got to this point where now it's like we catch each other going, don't do it. Like, don't tell them. Like, how do we keep coming back with questions? Like, we can give guidance on, let me help you learn how to think, but I don't want to tell you what to think, because once we start to do that, then it becomes the teacher's project, or whoever, not your project. You're passionate with, you just haven't been able to maybe quite get it to where you want it, but it's still yours. And I always think there's like this weird, it's really kind of walking on thin ice of, you don't want them to sit to be completely exasperated and feeling defeated and failure. But at the same time, you don't want to misinterpret where you think they're heading, and they end up going and trying to create, especially with younger kids, create something because they want to impress you versus this is what I want to make, and here are my justifications for it.
Yeah.
So I don't, as you're working with design students and things like that, obviously they're a little more higher level than maybe where I spend my time in terms of like age and development. Like, what do you see in that kind of space with that? It really becomes it can be challenging as a facilitator to kind of stand back. Like you said, it is uncomfortable, where you just want to go to the rescue.
Yeah. There's something, even I'm constantly prototyping classes and how I share information, how I sequence projects, and how I align those with my own objectives for the work or for the course or the experience, as opposed to maybe what the students' experiences are or expectations are. Meaning I'm very often not that interested in, well, it depends on the course, but I'm not that interested usually on, like, at the end of 10 weeks or 15 weeks or semester, or quarter, whatever, that you are going to have a product or a concept that's ready to go. You've like sort of vetted manufacturers. You've got this whole thing, like lined up. You've got distribution channels all squared away. Like, those are things. There's certainly courses in which that happens, which are amazing. They also, spend a fair bit of time on those details. Every one of those little items is itself a universe of understanding, or requires a universe of understanding.
Yeah.
So there's it's a long sort of meandering way to get back to. I'm often balancing maybe two things. One is introducing accountable check-ins where the work being shared is specific, but at a low barrier. And I think that's in service of prototyping, meaning it's like, as it represents the lowest resolution necessary to achieve what you're hoping at that moment. And what I mean by that is like a weekly, bi-weekly, end of the month, if we're talking about sort of like a semester long sort of project, but a check-in on, show me something and tell me what you've been learning about this, or what is the state of your thinking and your arc right now, which is different than give a presentation. So if you give a presentation, this like teaching to the test concept, or giving a presentation, and a presentation looks like this, and this is how we tell stories effectively with slides or whatever. And again, very valuable, but you can then sort of inadvertently put too much attention and require too much resolution for something that's casual and is meant to be like, hey, I just want to know where you're at, but I want you to know that you are intentionally sharing where you are right now. It's not arbitrary. It is part of the expectation here of you're checking in, you are showing me something. And I'm not concerned right now with what you've made necessarily. I ultimately would be, but I'm curious what you're learning and what you want to know. What's next? So again, some people show up with I'm thinking about a furniture class, for example. Like, some people show up with just great visual stuff that if there was no one around, no one standing around, you're like, oh, that wins, so to speak. Like, that one's done. Okay, great. And then next to it is basically like a pile of burnt cardboard kind of thing. You're like, well, what is that? But again, that's a like setting the expectation and designing the experience of articulating your work. And I think back to the experience, that's something that shows up too in the concept of prototyping is you are an experienced designer, not just a concept designer, right? So you are designing the way in which someone is engaging your question, which it often isn't like a product. It's kind of like, I don't know, like designing the treasure map and the treasure at the same time. And you're like, well, how is someone going to dive into this experience, or how is someone going to explore, or what is potentially like a non-linear way to get to something I don't know yet? So again, another long and winding treasure map there, but I think there's a value in designing communication moments that is consistent with prototyping. Like, I'm going to ask you for sort of a low resolution share out, but I'm going to ask it of you quickly and early, and we're only going to spend a little bit of time on it. It's not going to be a big deal, so to speak. It's intentional, but it's not. It's like less than a dress rehearsal, so to speak. The other thing that really strikes me about still stuck on the marinating.
No, great. I love it.
I'm marinating on the marinating.
Marinating,
yeah. Okay. Wow. I mean, there's such a tendency. I'll just speak for my own. I suspect others might resonate with this, but there's such a tendency to cram as much as you can into an amount of time, whether that's like a hourly sort of duration, or whether that's, if you're thinking about weeks and months of an experience with students or with anything really. So you're like, oh, I've got this much time, I have to jam in as much as I can, because that will represent me being, I don't know, diligent. And that will say like, oh, there's so much value to be had here. You must have all of this information. Whereas, wow, you seldom ever plan I don't know, non-time. So like reflection time or discussion, like those reflection and discussion, everybody knows those words. They are so frequently like a parsley garnish on the side of a dish. And you're like, oh yeah, by the way, we'll talk about that. We'll give a couple minutes at the end of this thing. Like, no, that is the thing.
Yes.
Which is not to say that parsley should be any sort of main course, but that's the thing. And it is, and for any number of reasons, it can feel and look terrible to say, oh, if I have an hour-long class, I'm gonna plan 30 minutes of content, and I'm actually, doesn't have to be like 30 content, 30 blank, but I'm actually gonna say like, oh, I'm gonna expect, I don't know, I'm gonna do 3 things, and we're gonna give 10 minutes of actual conversation, or I'm going to ask everyone to ask one of their peers a question, and then we're going to say like, hey, what did you learn from your peer? I would almost call it like transitions, but it is uncomfortable to design into your, I guess, like pedagogical experiences, reflective moments as an offering. It almost seems subtractive. Again, like back to if I was a product designer and I was not delivering a product, you're a teacher and you're offering up quiet time. That doesn't sound right. Shouldn't you be teaching something? And you're like, well, yeah, I am. And it is critical that this pairs with an experience they just had, because if they don't reflect on that experience, it won't stick. And they won't sort of acknowledge, oh, that's something I've got to do again and again and again and again and again. I think those transition moments are just, whew. Yeah. It's kind of like designing storage in a house or a building, which is another thing, by the way, of like what that every like I'm talking. This was a tour. It was an intentional tour I was taking with a colleague of mine, Scott Dorley, who's a creative director at the D School. A number of years ago, we were doing a space design project. And so we went and we're looking at kind of analogous examples, or just how are other industries doing this to try to learn different techniques and maybe see are there sort of behaviors that we could borrow and learn kind of from different industries. And we went and visited the public broadcasting production studio in San Francisco. And so we were going around backstage, and we weren't just wandering, but we were there, with a host who we knew. And we were walking the floor, and we saw sort of the news broadcasting sort of area and a bunch of sound stages and sets and stuff. And it was great. We saw lots of cool techniques. And then there was a moment where I don't quite know how we got onto this, but we started talking about storage. And this was at least a 2-story building, but for the most part, it was one kind of main production floor. Beneath it is the exact same square footage, which is completely empty except for storage. And our host was describing that they basically, over the course of a year, build out all their sets and take everything and sort of just like shove it downstairs and fill it up until basically it's too full. And then they just need to like purge that whole bottom floor. But it struck me as like, wow, an interesting behavior. But then just like numerically and spatially, you're like 50% of your kind of operational platform is storage. And it at any given time, particularly early in the year, you would look at it and be like, wow, this is totally underutilized. And what a waste. Couldn't something else be going on here? And you're like, well, actually something really is going on there. That's part of the magic of making this like upper floor work. Yeah. I think that goes back to this notion of like leaving space deliberately in a learning lesson or a learning sequence and saying like, this thing where they're not making something right now, but they're talking about and they're thinking about what they just learned. We got to leave that unprogrammed. I mean, it's programmed, but it's unprogrammed in a way, so that they can learn what they just experienced.
Yeah. I mean, you've got to intentionally build in the time for that to happen. I'm working in particular quite a bit. And it's a 6th grade classroom at the time of this recording. And it's like talking to the kids, like the old age adage, right? Like, where do you get most of your ideas? It's like when you're in the shower or walking your dog. It's that moment of quiet. It's that moment of that eureka moment. Doesn't mean it's going to magically happen when we've given you this chunk of time to process in private reasoning time and in small group and maybe with the class, but being deliberate to allow the conditions to be there for that to happen. And one of the things that as you're talking, it made me think that we did, that I need to actually make a note to go back to, is we did a thing called circle of support, where we would have everybody come together in the class and stand in a circle. And then we learned from actually the Iowa women's basketball program. They do that, and in practices, your feet have to touch to truly create this circle. Because some of this, to be vulnerable and to bring a prototype out to the world, we're asking you to be brave. We're asking you to share this thing that may or may not work. People may or may not approve or like it. So you got to have the proper environment for people to go, I'm going to put this out there and see what happens. But in there, in the circle of support, one of the things we do is we have people go around. It's not forced. We don't make it go around in a circle. And we acknowledge like the awesome things that we solved, noticed, or wondered, or new ahas, or learning. And at first, it's always kind of surface level. But then you get into it. It's like, man, Scott, I really appreciate how you came over today. We were really struggling with this cardboard structure. And you came over and you're so good at, building a trust for the bridge or whatever it might be. But what that does is, one, it makes you feel good. It acknowledges the receiving of gifts of this cross-platform, even though we're all doing our own things. We're trying to create this ecosystem where, I've got my stuff I got going on, but it doesn't mean I don't have space for you. But more importantly, then it opens up this dialogue of, wow, I didn't even think about using cardboard in that way. Or, man, I didn't even think about building a robot. Or I didn't even think about... Because you start to hear these ideas cross-pollinate, and we always say, like, you never know when you might need something. There's no bad idea. Like, there's no bad question. Like, write it down. What seems goofy now could be that magical ingredient that makes it taste, really amazing in a month's time. And so as you're talking, I'm just like, man, I need. I'm making a mental note, and I'm doing verbal vomit here, reflecting out loud. Like, I'm just, something, again, so simple. We built that time in, and yes, we should have been maybe given, we were always like, do we give them more time to work? Do we give them more time to do this? And man, really kind of manifested itself into this really safe space, if nothing else, just to be even brave to go out and share ideas, because it just became daily practice, And so I appreciate you sharing, because it made me kind of have my own aha moment there.
I'm struck by some of the details that you just shared, particularly the women's basketball team gathering and the notion of their feet touching as part of the experience that they're having.
Yeah.
That stands out to me. There was he worked full time there's a guy named Julian Gorodsky, who's a psychologist, and he used to work at the Stanford D School on a daily basis, and now sort of consults with courses. He and his work were just so I don't even know how to describe it. It's paramount, but in this like quiet and like comprehensive way that just seeped into the ways that everyone worked and really became inseparable. And a couple specific aspects where he really emphasized transitions or changes, both spatially and sort of corporeally, or like changing your posture when you're changing the activity. So I think this is something I've just sort of borrowed and seen and implemented in designing spaces and then designing like curriculum and sequences. But for example, if we're in a spot and we're just generating a bunch of ideas, maybe we'll be standing or just in some kind of different posture or some kind of different spatial configuration. And if we had the opportunity, maybe a different place physically than we would be if we were deciding on an idea. So if we're like changing from this headspace of being generative to evaluative, we might then change our posture, our body, some dynamic of the space as an environmental cue that, we're going to act differently based on what we're about to do or in service of what we're about to do. So the women's basketball team standing in a circle with their feet touching is not their MO. They're not out there playing. And in fact, everybody's on the court at the same time, conceivably, which is not, plausible in a game.
Yeah.
Or how they normally operate. So they're just like these cues. And I think that's something that, can stand out. This is more about space design, but it can stand out like so significantly and be kind of like a sleeper tool for people who don't feel that, or maybe don't actually have the opportunity to like modulate to a different space. Like classroom teachers who are like, I have agency over this space, but we can't leave this room, or we have to be in here, 8 hours a day or however long. And like, okay, well, they go to great lengths to make it feel inviting and welcoming and have everyone represented visually and spatially in the room. Like, this is your place, which is overall amazing. It's their home. But at times you do different things. And so there can be this like, what if we changed everybody's posture? What if we have everybody stand up versus sitting down, or in a circle, as you mentioned, as this sort of circle of sharing? What's some kind of different cue to signal like, we're about to do something, we're about to do something different. I think then that's something that gets lost on, it's almost a cliche. It's in the corporate sort of boardroom where you're like, give me great ideas. Everybody, sitting around the big conference table, and like literally the thing that happened right before that was like, you're fired.
Right.
These weird oscillations in like mental modes and things like, wait, I'm supposed to be vulnerable and share ideas. And, in the next sentence, I'm going to be like, reprimanded for them. That's a weird trap.
That is. Yeah.
So anyway, there's something about there's something in service of acknowledging like what you want to get out of an activity or what you're inviting from students in terms of their participation and their commitment. That can certainly be signaled by naming the phase. Like, we're in prototyping phase. We're not in, implementation, or we're in new ideas week versus best ideas week or something like that. So there's this like mental phasing, but then also there's cues, curriculum cues, and then physical sort of spatial cues that can, I think, help reinforce the kind of low resolution, or the, borrowing your term earlier, the creative constraints that help sort of support what you're trying to do.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I have a huge fascination with like just like learning space and just space design in general. And it becomes another kind of rabbit hole that I tend to find myself swirling in, and all the free time that, we all have sitting around doing nothing, right? But I love it. And that's what I think, like, having these where we can't necessarily like rebuild the walls and redesign this or build a new school or a new classroom, just like you said, how do we start to create these different spaces, within the confines that we have? And as you keep talking about like this low resolution concept of prototyping, one of the things I took from your book, that idea of that low resolution, and how do I, especially when I'm working with kids in the K-12, where they can get so caught up in the really like finer details of a part of the learning that isn't essential at that time, but not to say that it's not, but not to tell them like that's not important. So one of the things that I'm excited to try, or actually we're going to try it here this week, is they've been doing their quote unquote research and getting their sketches, and we're going to do our first, I'm calling it a mini prototype. And one thing we've done some test builds with like Lego, where we build something, get really excited, and then at the end of like we did like a 5-day cycle, and then they had to tear it down. They were not happy, and now they're kind of getting used to this like never being finished. But we're going to give them just one single material to build out their idea. And we're going to do, I think we're going to end up going with pipe cleaner, just cost effective, and if they can bend it and do whatever. The idea being that they don't get so attached to the thing, because it'll be cool, but it's not going to be like something that you want to go, present to NASA and be like, look how awesome this is. But the idea for them, what you said earlier, which is so vital, I think for a lot of educators that maybe in my lane that are trying to give themselves their own grace to allow this stuff to happen in the classroom, is the goal of that. It's not glorified research. If you were to walk by, it'd be like, oh, they're just playing. But really, it's for them as they're working through this pipe cleaner, not because I want them to be pipe cleaner sculpture experts.
Yeah.
But I want them to figure out, man, I really don't know enough about this to even know how to build it. Ding, ding, ding. That's our next phase for our next reiteration. We get into like some better supplies, or, man, this actually doesn't work. Ding, ding, ding. And yes, we might have constraints in materials, but guess what? Everyone has constraints. You're not always gonna be stuck with pipe cleaner, but it's like this kind of like this mid check of, yes, you think you know all the things, but maybe now doing it tangibly, but not getting so caught up. We want it to look perfect because we think we think our solution is perfect. Therefore, the first build has to be perfect too. And you kind of get your hopes up too soon. So this is designed to be kind of quick and messy and sloppy by design, to go back and go, ooh, maybe we actually don't know as much of what we think we did, and we keep kind of building that out to get to this kind of final phase. And so it's, as you were talking, I'm like, that's from your book. That's something that I'm excited to try to see how it goes, that I haven't done before. Hopefully that it expedites to a better. We move faster into the journey at the right pace to having this like better discovery of ourselves. I could care what the end product looks like, and our goal is, I mean, yes, we want it to look nice, but that's not, it's about the learning journey, but how do we get them moving forward in their ahas? And I think I'm excited to see how this makes that happen.
That's super cool. I love the idea and the practice of like a single material challenge as a prototyping or design sprint, where you've got sort of like Iron Chef in the way of like, well, here's the mystery ingredient, but it can show up. I say it like to suggest that it's arbitrary is like a disservice, I think, to the, which is not what I'm not
right.
suggesting.
No, I got you.
There's something about like, it can read as an arbitrary selection or arbitrary activity. We just gave them bubble wrap and that was it. There's a thing that can happen there, particularly if you have another instance of, we're going to have another bubble wrap challenge next project, or we're in that phase where students, this is an equity thing too, but they can get accustomed to seeing materials around them as reliable resources if they approach them that way.
Yeah.
Well, often, and for again, any number of reasons, classroom teachers are often sort of saddled with having to, turn trash into primary resourses and treasure, so to speak. But there is something about like borrowing from like a professional kitchen that I always pronounce this incorrectly, but the mise en place, where like everything is sort of prepared.
Yeah.
We're like, okay, we are going to be using old pizza cardboard boxes, but what we're going to do is we're going to like cut those up, and they're going to be like squares, or they're going to be clean from the start. And we're going to have them over there. And they're always going to be like, every time you walk around campus and you see some cardboard boxes, you're going to think, okay, like let's go break those down basically and turn them into squares or shapes or whatever that we will actively want to engage and no longer see as just like trash. Because there is even like a phase of this, which is weird too, where a student, you might encourage a student to say, don't use precious materials, that particularly like college and graduate students who maybe have more like automobile agency, like we can go buy something, or we can go behind Home Depot and dumpster dive or whatever. There's still that. They still have to do that. And it's not a one-to-one to say like, well, you don't have to buy the best materials. Oh, but by the way, you do have to become very resourceful and now go out like at dusk and, grab pallets and stuff. And like, which is cool. I mean, there is value and it's great. That resourcefulness is great, but it also is a disservice in saying like, every time I need to be creative, I also have to be sort of like preter-human in knowing what trash is behind or in an alleyway. And you're like, no, I'm just going to routinely say like, I'm always going to have this kit of parts, kit of basic stuff that is going to allow me to, when the moment is posed, manifest an idea, make something. Someone just asked me to like visualize and conceptualize an idea. Awesome. I've got the pipe cleaners.
Yeah.
They're in a box. Cool. I've got, I don't know, 70 different shapes and weird, not perfect, like from the store pieces of cardboard, but I can cut them, they're angles. I don't have to like process them in the moment, or bubble wrap or envelopes or, what have you. So those, I so deeply resonate with that concept that you've introduced there of this, like, we're going to focus on one material and then reinforcing that with of course you're not going to like build a rocket ship out of popsicle sticks. Of course you're not.
Right.
Let's not spend long enough that we somehow like get so attached, or our popsicle stick rocket ships become beloved.
Yes. Right. Right.
That's not the expectation. The expectation is you quickly manifesting work, getting it out of your head so that others can engage it. Could be popsicle sticks, could be, and there's strategic reasons to pick any number of those. Like pipe cleaner is great. It bends. You can make it into a hinge or a joint. It's long. You could kind of make it spatial or a net. Anyway, it can become volumetric and functional at the same time. But yeah, that's something that so fits with an iterative and escalating sort of commitment to resources in service of your discovery, in service of your learning. I'm also struck by, there was this show, I guess it went off the air in, I don't know, maybe like 2015, but it was that HBO series From Here to the Moon.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I don't know, any, early NASA mission stuff is just dripping with great examples of prototypes. But even in this idealization, this sort of Hollywoodization of the sequence, there's a fantastic scene where the super typical or like stereotyped kind of NASA engineers, the button-up shirts and the glasses and the pocket protectors and stuff. They're trying to get Mission Commander. They're trying to convince Mission Commander to basically like take the seats out of the module because it will save weight and change this aspect ratio. And it is exactly the moment of you're telling someone something, you're not showing them. You're not creating an experience to help them learn and to help you learn from what they understand. And so it like quickly shifts into this, like, okay, let's quickly build out, a lunar module out of cardboard with this configuration at scale, like human scale, so you can step into it. And it takes time and takes commitment, and you can see it again, fictionalization, but it is exactly the thing, the behavior, the materiality, the timing constraints. It works one-to-one from that movie example, was a TV show, that TV show example to a student experience. When students make things volumetrically, that's one thing. When they make things volumetrically at scale, like if a human scale thing, whether that's a point of purchase sort of experience, like, I'm going to a restaurant, I'm standing in line, and so I'll sort of mock that up with masking tape and cardboard boxes. But the second you can like step into it and it becomes immersive and not just projection or pretend, still pretend, but not just isn't relying entirely on projection or imagination, amazing things happen. It is it is a slight extension of, making a pipe cleaner thing on your desk, but it's not that big. It's not that big a leap. It's
right.
Just maybe a different material, a little bit more time. They're right there though. They're just right there from going from like, oh, this is a pretty concept, to like, whoa, this is actually how this experience might go, or like, let's play this out. It's amazing. It's just amazing.
Well, that's where I think, as you say that, well, what you do is you're moving towards creating an experience, not just an object. And I shouldn't say just an object, because it's incredible anytime we make anything. I mean, I've seen it time and time again when someone figures out how to turn a little LED light on and figure out what a circuit is for the first time, they act like they won the Powerball, because there's something about when something works that we have done, whether that first where it's following instructions, and from that it just goes, okay, well now I want to go do 5 lights. Can I do 5 lights? I don't know. Can you? Let's go. Let's try. And so, like you said, when you create this, there's an immersion, there's something that comes of it, and that, and that's the whole goal of even like this pipe cleaner thing, is just to get them to go, well, what if we combine, like, and that's the exciting piece. And it's also the nerve-wracking piece too, because you don't know where they're going to take it, but that's learning. And that's the excitement of man, just get out of their way, provide a little bit of those supports when they need it, help them on the how-tos. But man, just where their ideas go, is that's the exciting part for anything that we do, whether we're facilitating or definitely doing it ourselves. And so it's just so great. I'm over here scribbling down notes, and it's just been phenomenal. I want to be respectful of your time, because I know we're already closing in here on an hour, and I mean, I could talk to you, for the rest of the day, but I'm sure you've got other things to do. But I do want to wrap up and just be respectful of your time, and also just respectful of your work. Outside of telling everybody and their mother to read your book, I know I was telling you through email, we've got like a little mini book club of our own. We've got people reading it right now, which has been fun. But there's a lot to the work. There's a lot to the things that you're doing. But as we come to a close, is there anything that you want to share that we didn't get to in our conversation today, that for the listener, maybe coming across you and your work for the first time, you really want to make sure that they hear from you?
Wow, that's a cool question. Thanks for posing it. Also, thanks of course for the time and opportunity. What a treat. I do think there's something that folks can, I don't know, reinforce for themselves. Maybe I'll put it that way. The book, it really does focus on questions, and I do think it is worth considering when you're making a statement and you're trying to convince someone of something, versus when you're actually showing something to someone as a way to ask a question. You do have it in your head, like, oh, I'm seeking validation, or I hope they like this. What am I looking for that's going to tell me they like it? So there is a question there. I do think it is worth kind of almost like writing it on your hand, or just putting it, a note and taping it to your leg on sort of blue tape, like make it a question. I think that the almost uncomfortably so, like starting with, I'm only going to be focusing on questions for whatever this experience is that I'm about to have and about to initiate. Um, Even trying that as explicitly. So for the next time you're going to share an idea with a colleague or a friend or student or whomever, walk into that or enter that experience, I should say, and focus on, I'm going to make it a task for myself to just focus on questions right now. My expectation is not to have a solution or um, a resolved conclusion at the end of this. I'm going to say I have a bunch of now raw ingredients based on what I'm asking, what my questions are. And I'm going to make sense of that when I'm done, so to speak. I don't have to be making sense of it in exact real time and figure the whole thing out. That's not always, obviously normal work doesn't always work out that way, but the more comfortable you are seeing a moment and saying, oh, wow, I'm seeing something right now I'm not familiar with. I don't want to squelch this. I've got to leave space for what I don't know to emerge right now. And the more that I poke it, or the more that I try to like convince myself what this is, like the less likely I am to understand what is actually in front of me. So that was a long way to say, I really do think the focusing on the question, as simple as that sounds, is a big deal. Paired with, this is actually what I wanted to suggest. Gosh, there's only value to be gained by engaging other people.
Yeah.
Prototyping, certainly there are instances when you're prototyping for yourself, and by making something, cabinet makers, or I don't know, I'm really into guitar lutherie, like they'll make jigs and things and say like, oh, by making that thing for myself, I just figured out it can't be made that way, or I need to change something. So great. You are your own audience. Awesome. Yeah. There is value in prototyping for yourself, but it is immeasurably important to see your work as something that other people are going to engage. And sometimes you are kind of starting something that's really going to be their work. And it's not about you so much. So getting more comfortable with showing your work to other people, asking other people to participate in your work, asking other people for their opinion and input, whether that's an answer or not. People, will offer up like, well, here's what you should do. I'm like, that's fantastic. Tell me why. Why should I do it that way? It's flipping this sort of like, this is really what you should be doing, kind of someone offering a solution. That can feel, I don't know, antagonizing. And as back to like, why don't people ask other people for their opinion more often? Very frequently, people come at them with a solution, and you just, you're not looking for that solution. You're not personally ready to hear it. If you flip that, just going back to the question, like, great, thanks for that suggestion of why I should do it that way. Why do you think I should do it that way? Like, if that was the answer, what would I achieve by that? Or why would that be important? Help me out with that. So there's this engaging other people and thinking of that engagement as a question is not always obvious. It's not always comfortable, but it is, I don't know, my experience, 99.9% of the time, like what you need to do and productive. And it pays off. It's not just a sort of a fool's errand. It pays off for your work and hopefully for theirs too.
Yeah. I mean, it's essential, going back to your idea of like the treasure, building the treasure and the treasure map and the path at the same time. Those questions is what progresses you on that journey to inevitably at the end. We never know when it's final, and we never know, I mean, sometimes we have deadlines where there is, yes, it has to be done, but sometimes it's just that magic moment where the path does come to the closure where the treasure is. And, I think asking those questions just keeps moving us forward in that work. And so I think that's a wonderful insight to wrap up this conversation on. Scott, this has been phenomenal. I love it. So thought-provoking. I know I'm already excited to go back and listen to it again for the editing and really, go back to the word we were all focused on earlier, marinate, a lot of the things that you said. You said lots of wonderful things that I think it gives us all a lot of things to pause and think through and, figure out our next steps in our own journey, whether we are a designer or an educator or a student or whoever we are and whatever we're doing. lots of just terrific insights and things to think about and process. And so you've got the book. This is a prototype. Outside of the book, we'll get the links and all that stuff in the show notes. But Scott, if people want to follow you, learn more about your work, and just kind of see more of what you've got going on, where can they go? And I'll put all this in the show notes. But for those listening, and I always say they're at a red light and want to start following and learn from you right away, where's the best place to go?
Sure. Well, thanks. Certainly I could be found on LinkedIn. I have a newsletter there regarding prototyping, and then I can be, contacted there as well. I have a blog on Medium focused on design and prototyping. I know we actually talked about space quite a bit. So just as a note, the previous book I wrote called Make Space just had its kind of 10th anniversary, which is super exciting.
Right there. I got it right there.
Awesome. Topically, that thematically just shows up all the time and certainly connects to, a lot of the stuff in this new book. This is a prototype. So,
yeah, I love it. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been absolutely phenomenal. And it's been such an honor to be able to spend this time with you, getting to push my own growth edges and learn from one of the best. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Aaron. I really appreciate it. You're welcome.
Woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning, chilling with coffee mugs, me and coffee chugs, talking education all across the nation, pushing boundaries, thinking innovation, living on that edge of chaos, going insane, listening to coffee chugs like caffeine for the brain. One of the top teachers in Iowa, word is born, here to show the world that there's more here than corn.